I'd like to share with you some basic models that will guide your thinking about security controls. We've talked about some high-level conceptual models for thinking about cybersecurity in general, but now I want to focus on some basic models that will help you thinking about designing security for a system that you may be managing. These two models are elementary and essential for your thinking. Many people who begin their journey in cybersecurity think that cybersecurity is all about maintaining confidentiality or secrets, but it's not. It's also about maintaining data integrity as well as availability. So you certainly, in a hospital system, wouldn't want to have data about you subject to corruption, especially if you have an emergent problem that needs to be taken care of. And at the same time, you would like to have the system available if it's needed for an emergency purpose. We had a situation here in the Northwest where a hospital was being used for a spamming business that was taking over more and more space on the server that likewise was housing personal identifiable information about patients. And so gradually, the spamming operation, which was illegal, it had been established by some attackers that thought they could get in and use that free space, began to crowd out and slow down the systems that were needed for emergent care. And so availability became very important under those circumstances. We call this the CIA of security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This second model looks at how we go about thinking through cybersecurity controls for systems. There's an assessment process that requires assessing the systems that you're attempting to protect for their vulnerabilities, and at the same time mapping threats that may be arrayed against those systems against those vulnerabilities. What threat adversaries are out there that may be looking at penetrating the particular system you're trying to protect? And where do those vulnerabilities in that system overlap with a potential threat? And from those vulnerability and threat pairs, we derive controls, and we develop a map of implementing controls for the entire system. But the success of our controls really depends on how much we trust those controls. There are some assumptions here that the designs we put in place meet the goals of our security needs for the system. We also are assuming that the sum total of all the controls we put in place achieve the goals that we're outlining for our security systems. At the same time, we assume that the implementation is correct, which is more of a function of the human beings doing the installation. And then how are those systems maintained, updated, and patched, and cared for beyond the initial implementation? Those latter 2 points really assume perfect human beings. That being the case, the bottom line assumption you should make in designing any security system is that you'll never be 100% perfectly secure. And I say that over and over again. This is not an end state that you should expect to achieve. So what do you do in those circumstances? Well, the grim reality is that if you have something that's desirable for an adversary, an information object, the probability of it being compromised or taken is 1. It's just simply a function of the adversary's resources and time and the value of that object to the adversary. So in those circumstances, what do we do? Well, in designing security for a system, you need to assume that that system will be breached. And that brings in a different set of factors in your thinking than from the old days when we relied on keeping the adversaries out with firewalls or identifying the adversary quickly with intrusion detection systems. These devices are no longer 100% reliable. It doesn't mean that we don't employ them, but it does mean we develop different strategies that make our systems resilient in the face of breach. So we essentially are also faced with the fact that these controls are going to cost a significant amount of money, and organizations don't have an endless amount of capital to invest in their cybersecurity controls. So how do we prioritize the controls that we come up with? We need to do a basic risk assessment, understanding the likelihood of a breach at a particular vulnerability that we've identified against the cost of protecting it. And I'll give you an example. If you have a database of employee information that keeps track of training records, and we're talking about asbestos training required by the EPA of the employees of this particular company, it may not be an information asset with a high priority to protect. However, if you're a nuclear power plant and you're tracking the training of highly trained nuclear scientists, then you might indeed want to keep that training database as a high priority for protection. You wouldn't want names and identification to get out to particular adversaries. So same idea, training database, different purposes, and so you can see that doing a risk assessment helps you think through the value of the assets that you're protecting against the cost of loss and the likelihood of loss. Again, these models will help you think through how to implement and operationalize cybersecurity in an organization.